let's have a look at a slightly different approach to training principles. When Prometheus stole the fire from Zeus, Zeus shackled him to the mountain, and every evening an eagle came and picked out the liver of Prometheus. Overnight, this wound healed and Prometheus was healthy again on the next day. And then in the evening, the eagle again came and picked out the liver. What does this story have to tell us? Well, I think it just shows that the human body has the ability to adapt. So the liver is picked out, overnight the wound healed, the liver is picked out, and so on and so on. So the human body has the ability to adapt. So why does that matter? We'll get into that. So what will you learn in this lecture? What is adaptation? The importance of adaptation for training, and then a practical application. So what is adaptation? I just talked about the story of Prometheus, but actually adaptation is a biological principle where the body has the ability to adapt. I'm not going to read out all the entire definition. I guess you'll get bored by that. But as a takeaway, adaptation refers to adjusting to an environment and undergoing physiological changes. And that is very important now for the course of the next lectures. So what's the importance of adaptation for training? Zatsiorsky and Kraemer said, adaptation is one of the main laws of training. I think that's a very smart thing to say, and which is very often neglected when I spoke about in the previous lecture about training principles. There's not always a talk about adaptation. But anyway, adaptation is at the core of everything we do in training. So, I read it out. If a training is planned and executed correctly, the result of systematic exercise is an improvement of the athlete's physical fitness as the body adapts to the physical load. So, if planned and executed correctly, the body adapts to the physical load. So, what's adaptation and what's the adaptive process? And that is simplified here. That's a model I've made, so let's have a look. Basically, we have a baseline. That's the body is in homeostasis. Homeostasis is very simple. The inner milieu of the body is in balance. Then, due to training, there's a heterostasis. Heterostasis basically means the inner milieu is out of balance. And then the body has the ability to adapt to a new baseline where the body is again in homeostasis or in balance. So this is how it works across time. There's a stimulus, then there's a response, and then there's a second response. And we can see when we go from our baseline, the first response is performance levels will go down. And then as another response, performance levels will go up, the second response. And this basically a stimulus going through a period of recovery, and then there is an adaptation. So adaptation is the word again here. And as you can see, some people use that training principle called stimulus, recovery, and adaptation. But the questions we have here is, how do you elicit adaptations in the first place? Once adaptations are elicited, how do you maintain and secure these adaptations? And then how do you direct these adaptations? How do you get these adaptations into the direction you want to go? And this brings us to the practical application. So here we have the three questions, and this is where I wanted to outline a slightly different approach of training principles. It's from Sindel, it's only in German language, but anyway, there are principles that trigger adaptation. Then there are principles that secure or maintain adaptations. And then there are principles that direct adaptations. So, what are these principles? Now you see here's the 3x3 structure I've outlined in the introductory lesson. So we have the principle of an optimal stimulus, the principle of progressive overload, and the principle of a varied stimulus. This is how we elicit and trigger adaptations. In order to secure and maintain these adaptations, there is the principle of stimulus and response, the principle of continuity and reversibility, and the principle of periodization and cyclization. And then when we want to direct the adaptation in the direction we want, we have the principle of individuality and age appropriateness, the principle of increasing specificity, and lastly, the principle of interdependency. So what's different about it? Oh, I promised you it's a different approach. Well, what I do like, it's not a quote-unquote random selection of principles, and each training principle serves a specific purpose, which is adaptation. And remember, adaptation is the main law of training. And also here you can see every training principle. Number one, you can see what it serves, then the name of the training principle, and it also has a biological basis. And remember, we talked about earlier, adaptation is a biological process. So you can download this graphic. Anyway, you can see we have the implication of the training principle, we have the training principle, and then we have the biological basis. And over the course of the next lectures, I will go through the training principle, what it means, and what actually the biological basis for that training principle is. So it has a biological basis, and it provides the what, the how, and the why. If you are not familiar with the what, how, and why, this is one of the most successful TED Talks from Simon Sinek. He says how great leaders inspire action, and he dissects what it means to have a what, so what it is, how to do it, but the importance of the why behind it, to really understand what are the motives or what are the whys. And this is what you can see here in this outline, that yes, there is the training principle, but why is that training principle important and why does it work? So what, how, and why. And then in closing, it's very important to understand that it remains a selection of training principles. There's no right or wrong. Anyway, it's a set of principles, and unfortunately I can't take away the thinking. But if you take these principles to heart and understand them, you can apply it yourself for your situations. Remember what Ralph Waldo Emerson said: as to method, there are maybe 1,000,001, but principles are few. The man who tries methods ignoring principles is sure to have trouble. The man who understands principles can successfully create his own methods. And a few things before we hop off. Nothing is written in stone here. So principles serve as a guideline. They should not be viewed in isolation. They overlap, they complement each other, and actually some of them exclude each other. And what you will see over the course of the lectures, you see this recap slide. And the further we go on in the lectures, the more often you see that recap slide. Why does that happen? Well, there are a few very important things. By now you found out adaptation is one of them, but there are a few things that come back. And therefore, understanding the basis, the basics of the principles will help you to understand the principles well. So, what did we talk about? What is adaptation? The importance of adaptation for training, and then the practical application. I see you in the next one when we talk about the principle of an optimal stimulus. If you've missed the previous one, here you can find it.